It was Memorial Day back in 2004. Everybody else was pretty excited about the holiday, but I wasn't. I knew that it's going to be very long. After 15 years, my marriage had unraveled to an unrecognizable place. I'd been struggling over the idea of divorce for some time, but I was worried about what everybody else would think. I was worried if I'd disappoint my parents, and I was mainly worried if it would be the best choice for my children. But something happened this weekend. This weekend, a flip switched. My mind changed. The way that I thought was not the way that I had always used to think. This weekend, I sat in my bedroom corner, cowered, afraid to move, afraid to say the wrong thing. I went over and over in my mind trying to figure out how I got to this place in my life, literally in the corner of my bedroom. And what I came to realize was up until then, I hadn't been the driver of my own car called life. I'd been a passenger in that car. I hadn't taken control. And from that point forward, I knew that that would be what I had to do. When you find the lowest place that you can possibly go, the only place you have left to go is up. So that's what I did. I stood up. I found the courage to get in my car and drive to a courthouse and get a restraining order. Back then, that was the hardest thing I'd ever have to do. That weekend, I realized that asking myself why bad things were happening to me was futile. Where my power lied and where our reactions mattered was how we respond to those hard things that happen to us in our life. I didn't always think like that, though. I didn't always try to make something good out of something bad. I got married when I was 19, right out of high school. I was from a very small town where everybody knows everybody. My mom knew what I did before I got home. I was the big sister to one little brother who was almost 17 when I left on my honeymoon. I was lying in the beach, soaking up the warmth of the sun, and I got a chill come over my body. Not the kind of chill from a breeze or from cold, but the kind of chill that told me to get up and go call home. I could hear the crackle and the cry and surprise in my mom's voice when she answered. And she said, "It's Carie." My dad got on the line, and he simply said, "Your brother's dead. You need to come home." This was the beginning of some really dark days for me while I was reasoning with my reality on a daily basis, and I was back then questioning why these bad things were happening to me. Over the next 5 years, I'd lose all my grandparents who were really influential in my life, and I went through a pregnancy that didn't end up well. I wanted to know why these bad things were happening, but more bluntly, I was wallowing in that why. It didn't come until years later when I sat cowered in the corner of my bedroom that I realized that that why did not matter. That what mattered was, and where our power lies, is how we respond to those hard things that happen to us. So from that point forward, I knew that my reactions and my responses to the hardest things that I'd ever have to do would be what was important. A few years after I'd started over on my own with my 3 young people in tow, who were then 3, 7, and 9, I got a phone call. "Miss Covel, you have stage 3 invasive breast cancer. Find a doctor. You're going to need one." Click. I drove myself home. I made dinner like I did every other night, and I waited for the boys to get home from school. I knew when we sat down that night I was going to have to tell them. And I did. My youngest son immediately asked, "But who's going to be my mom?" And I, without hesitation, said, "I am. I am going to be your mom." I could see the fear in their eyes, and they were all afraid. I asked them what we did when things got tough, and they answered all at the same time. We fight. I said, you're absolutely right. Not going down without a fight. But I am going to need you boys to help me get through this, because this is going to be the hardest thing that we've ever had to do. I was hooked up to my first chemo treatment, sitting in a recliner chair. And I looked to my left, and I saw an elderly man who was worn down and looked like he'd lived a long life. I looked to my right and saw a 12-year-old young girl. She'd already lost most of her hair, and she was bundled up in a blanket with her mom sitting by her side. And I thought to myself, this just sucks. Nobody should have to deal with the nasty-ass disease like this. But then I said, so why are you asking yourself, why is it happening to you? That why doesn't matter. I knew by then that my response to that bad thing, or my reaction to that hardest thing that I was going through, what would make the difference, was what was important. A couple months later, back in that familiar recliner, sitting around with 6 friends I'd made that are going through the same thing that I was going through, a woman and her daughter came in our doctor's office, and they were speaking a different language, but visibly upset. You could tell that something was going wrong, and the short version of the story is that our doctor had forgot her medicine that day. Our doctor traveled to us because the closest place was 150 miles from where we were. But somehow the office forgot to pack her medication, and she wasn't going to get her treatment for the day. After a bunch of talking in another language, they told everybody they had no car, they didn't know anybody that could take them, and they were devastated that she wasn't going to get her treatment. Out of nowhere, I said, I'll take them. People in the room turned and looked at me. My nurse was concerned that I wasn't going to be up to it the next day, but by then I'd learned that I wouldn't feel super bad until late that night, the following day, and I'd have time to drive over and drive back before I didn't feel good. I said, if that's what they need, I'll take them. And I gave them my number and told them I'd pick them up in the morning. But the surprise and the astonishment on the looks of the faces of the other people in the room were really what got to me. They were surprised that a stranger, much less someone going through the same thing, would have offered a lending hand. I knew, though, that it was my opportunity to make something good out of this bad thing. I knew that it was my obligation to try to make a bad and a hard situation a little bit better. So I did. My cancer life lasted about 4 years, full of doctors and surgeries and clinical trials, broken bones, and the literal reconstruction of the me standing in front of you here today. I could do a whole talk just on that, but that's not the message I want to leave you with today. A few lessons, though, that I learned. Wigs and wind do not mix. You gotta hold on to your hair when it's windy. They should have put a warning label in those things. Don't ever laugh at yourself. Don't ever laugh at yourself. If you can't laugh at yourself, somebody else surely can. And when you're going through some really, really bad stuff, laughter's the best medicine. So now I want to bring us all back to the current time we are today and talk a little bit about while I was going through my personal adversity and hardships, I was also working for a living and supporting my family. When they ask you in grade school, what do you want to do when you grow up? And raise my hand and say, I want to be a secretary and work in a prison. But when they built 2 state prisons in my small hometown, it was a smart and practical thing to do to get some stability for our family, so that's what I did. 23 years ago, I began my career with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation at an entry-level office assistant position, and I've worked my way up and through to the associate warden position that I hold today. Some people tell me I make things look easy. I want to tell you it isn't, and it wasn't easy to get to where I am. I was doubted all along the way and questioned with who do you think you are and why do you think you can do it? My personal lessons and things that I've learned going through the adversities in my personal life made it that much more easier for me to say, why not me? I can do what I set my mind to. And so in the associate warden position that I hold, I have the ability or the opportunity to affect change in thousands of people's lives every day. Kind of have a captive audience. I take advantage of that opportunity by creating environments where people can make the best of their lives should they choose to do so. But more importantly, I share my mentality and I talk with people about asking yourselves, why not you? But what are you going to do about this to make it better? Every day, every minute, every one of us has the ability to start over. We can change from a version of ourselves that we're not currently happy with into anybody else we would like to be. I'm going to give you all permission to steal my phrase. When you're faced with the hardest thing you've ever had to do, an obstacle or an adversity that seems insurmountable, ask yourself, why not me? What am I going to do with it to make this better? Thank you.